Several towns in eastern Victoria remain under flood threat this morning as floodwaters continue to rise. The State Emergency Service says flood peaks and a high tide at Lakes entrance overnight were lower than expected, saving many homes from inundation. But several main roads remain closed.
Now, the SES says it will focus on the Gippsland Lakes area today. Residents in Paynesville, Raymond Island and Loch Sport have all been told to prepare to evacuate.
At the moment, we've got Defence personnel, around 40 personnel from the Defence Force, working with SES and CFA volunteers in those communities, sandbagging as precautions those properties that are known to be problematic, particularly in the Lakes entrance area. We'll look over the next 24 hours, we could see in the vicinity of 500 to 600 properties that will become at risk of flooding of some kind. Again, that won't necessarily be flooding above floorboards in those properties, but certainly the streets and the surrounds are very much likely to see flood effects.
Our reporter Lisa Maksimovic is in Lakes entrance and she joins us now. Lisa, good morning. Some relief overnight. What is the situation there this morning?
Well, in Lakes entrance, certainly there's a collective sigh of relief this morning as people wake up. There certainly hasn't been the inundation that was perhaps forecast as a worst-case scenario. What we heard last night, that the fears were that the tide, during the peak high tide at 10 o'clock last night, that we could see as many as 300 homes or more affected by floodwaters, and of those, perhaps 170 completely inundated or isolated by floodwaters. That hasn't happened. I've spoken to the SES this morning and they say that the peak was actually far less than that. It didn't reach it was actually probably well under 1 metre. So those things didn't eventuate last night. There hasn't been any flooding or any inundation from what we've been able to see this morning. So that's quite a relief, although they are still stressing that there are threats tonight when there is another high tide at about midnight.
Well, that's right, and that is the focus of authorities there, the danger of this second so-called king tide being higher than what was experienced overnight.
Well, yesterday they said that last night would be probably the peak of this flood event for this community. They said that there would be another high tide at 10 o'clock this morning and then again at midnight tonight, but that they wouldn't be as dramatic as what we saw last night. And considering that last night didn't reach the forecast height, you know, we would be expecting that perhaps it won't be as severe as what they predicted around here, although authorities of course don't want people to be too relaxed about the situation. They're still urging caution around the whole Gippsland Lakes area, and as you mentioned earlier, Michael, there's still a number of prepare to evacuate notices in place, so they do want to keep people on their toes here.
Now, Lakes entrance is a very popular tourist destination. We're heading into a long weekend. What fears do locals have about the effect on the tourism trade there?
Well, that's right. The long weekend, just this weekend, coming in a couple of days, and this is a very popular tourist destination about 4 hours from Melbourne, and it's a very beautiful place. We spoke to people yesterday who were actually quite cross that, you know, in the case that nothing eventuated overnight, and that has happened, that they would lose business this weekend for nothing. So I know of one reporter who was approached yesterday by someone who was quite angry that they were getting this media attention, that this would be a beat up, that nothing would happen, and that they had already had some dozen customers who'd cancelled bookings. Now, of course, this morning they'll wake up and say that they were right. But of course, authorities are always saying the situation, it's better to be prepared, and there's not much can be done when you do have to get these warnings out of what could have happened.
Lisa Maksimovic will leave there. We'll speak to you a bit later on.